Comrades, when I look at who I'm speaking to, I feel confident that I'm correct when I say, Amandla! Amandla! Viva Amku Viva! Viva! Viva Amku Viva! Viva! Long live the spirit of Mambush! Long live! Long live! Long live the spirit of Mambush! Long live! Long live! I was doubting, comrades, because I didn't hear any revolutionary slogans at the beginning if I was at the right place. But now I see I am at the right place. President Mutunjwa, my friend and comrade Joseph, members of the AMCU executive, our dearest comrades, the widows of Marikana, your families, those that were injured and who may be amongst us, comrades from Lonmin in particular, or Sibanye Stillwater as it's now called, and our comrades and guests from all over, I greet you on this very important day. It's an important day not because we just are commemorating the loss of life, but we are also celebrating the revolutionary spirit of ordinary people, of humble people, of workers who stood up against all odds to fight for something which most people regarded as completely utopian and unrealistic. They stood up and demanded an increase of not just 6%, not just an inflation level increase, but they stood up and demanded what workers and the working class in this country have been fighting for decades, for a living wage and for decent work. They demanded 12,500 rand. Now, they died for that demand. But whilst we commemorate the tragedy, the massacre of Marikana, and we think about the perpetrators, and I'm sure during the course of today, and particularly on the 16th, when we will rally at the Kopi, when we think of those perpetrators, we must think about the struggle that our brothers and our sisters fought that have revolutionized the trade union movement in this country. And perhaps we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, I've been asked to speak on a rather technical and difficult issue, namely on the issue of illicit financial flows. So what has that got to do with the Marikana massacre? It's what I'm going to try and explain. But I want to start, comrades, and I hope, Comrade Hector, motivator, you're going to give me some time, because this is not an easy issue to elaborate in a way in which we feel empowered to take the struggle forward. I'm going to start with a quote that I think is extremely relevant of a great revolutionary of our movement who wrote about the 1946 Great Mine Workers' Strike. Her name was Ruth First. I hope many of you remember her, and I think it's appropriate in this month. She said, "It was one of those great historic moments that in a flash of illumination educates a nation, reveals what has been hidden, destroys lies and illusions." Similarly, the great mine workers' strike of 2012 was similar in puncturing the lies and illuminations of post-apartheid South Africa. Now, one major issue illuminated by the strike of the rock drill operators was the issue of illicit financial flows, perpetuated by transnational corporations. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to define what we mean by illicit financial flows. It covers a wide range of activities, but according to the Washington-based Research Institute Global Financial Integrity, we're talking about the illegal movements of money or capital from one country to another. It's an illicit financial flow when these funds are illegally earned, transferred, and are utilized across an international border. And it can be about drug cartels using trade-based money laundering, or it can be a corrupt public official using an anonymous shell company, or it can be a member of a terrorist organization wiring money from one region to another region. But the most significant part of these illicit financial flows are transnational corporations, particularly in the mining industry, in the extractive industries of this country, who shift their profits in order, in our analysis, to avoid paying taxation and avoid their responsibilities in the countries in which they operate. And in fact, the significance of the Marika Massacre and the strike at Lonmin and Impala and Anglo Platinum of the platinum workers was it shed light on the practice of particularly Lonmin in the way in which it shifted its profits out of the country. Now, I'll come back to that in a moment. But I want to say that these transnational corporations, they use illicit financial flows because it offers them, and they set up what they call companies in tax havens or secrecy havens in areas, countries where their operations are obscured, where there are no records of who the actual owners of the shell company is, or where the corporate tax rate is very, very low, in some instances, zero. So it provides secrecy, it provides for the corporation financial security, it allows them to minimize their tax obligations, and of course, it gives them remote access to manage their offshore wealth. And when I say offshore wealth, what are we talking about? We are talking about not a few $1 million sitting in these tax havens. The estimate, dear friends, dear comrades, we are talking about something between 24 $132 trillion that are sitting in these tax or secrecy havens around the world, out of reach of government control and out of the space of working class struggle for decent wages and working conditions. Every year, it is estimated that at least $500 billion is flowing into these tax havens. For Africa, which is an impoverished, underdeveloped continent, it is estimated that at least $90 billion is lost in tax revenues to our governments, which could be used for development purposes. A report shows that from sub-Saharan Africa, outflows amounted to 84% of official development aid, meaning that for every $100 entering our region as so-called aid, 84 is siphoned off illegally. So you can imagine the impact of this phenomena. For South Africa, what are we talking about? We're talking about something like between $15 and $25 billion flowing illicitly out of South Africa. In 2007, it is estimated that 20% of the GDP flowed out of this country in illicit financial flows. This is not including the normal outflows of profits that companies make and the dividends that companies make to shareholders to their locations in foreign countries. Now, this is possible because what has happened over the last 40 years has been a massive shift in power to transnational corporations, facilitated by the deregulation, the liberalization of trade and finances, which saw the growth of transnational corporations and their operations around the world, no longer confined to being a national corporation in the United States. Suddenly, these corporations could develop their subsidiaries in China, in Africa, in Latin America, and so on, and seek the cheapest forms of labor and inputs so that their profits could be maximized. Now, this has resulted in a situation today when we look at the 100 biggest economies in the world. It's no longer we're talking about countries' economies. We're talking about, of the 100 biggest economies in the world, more than 60 of these are corporations, not countries. Another staggering figure to give you a sense of the power of these transnational corporations and the opportunity for these illicit financial flows is that 63% of all trade takes place within and between the subsidiaries of these transnational corporations. So it's not real trade that is happening between one country and another country. It is a subsidiary of one corporation purchasing from another of its related and sister companies. Now, to give you a sense of this, when we were doing research as the AIDC on the question of illicit financial flows, in particular with reference to Lonmin and in the Platinum Belt, what we found was that take Anglo-American South Africa, the company that was built up its wealth here, we found that over 90, the company had over 90 subsidiaries checkered all around the world. 90 subsidiaries, which it was trading with. Now you can see that it provides the opportunity for it to decide where it locates its profits through how it undertakes the transactions between a subsidiary in South Africa and, let's say, a subsidiary in one of these tax havens, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Now, the massacre led to the establishment of the Farnham Commission that investigated what actually took place. And we were asked to give a report on the financial situation of Lonmin. And the question that was being asked was, could Lonmin have afforded the demand for 12,500 rand? And what we found was that Lonmin was indeed using its subsidiaries that they had located in various strategic parts of the world to shift their profits out so as to indicate that they had less money in order to pay workers' wages. It is an unusual situation because Lonmin, like many other transnational corporations, declares its annual financial statements as a group financial statement. So you can't see what Western Platinum is earning or what Eastern Platinum. It's incorporated in the entire financial report that is provided. But Farnham gave us the opportunity to get access to Lonmin's reports. And what did we find? We found that Lonmin had set up a marketing company in a place called Bermuda. This company called Western Metal Sales was not a company at all. It was a letterbox sitting in a law firm called Applebee's. And Western Metal Sales was charging Lonmin 245 million rand for marketing the platinums that Lonmin was producing. Can you see? No staff, no telephone, nothing existed in Bermuda. It simply was a measure through which Lonmin could channel 245 million out of South Africa, which it wouldn't be taxed on. And you remember, tax at that time was 28% for South African corporations or for operations in South Africa. So 28% of that amount of money would have gone to the revenue services. But workers didn't lose, you know, if it's to make it easier for our math, if it's 100 million taken out illicitly, SARS would have lost 28 million. But the workers lost the difference between that 28 and 100 million. In other words, 72 million was lost to the wage negotiating table. I know it's complicated, comrades, but I have no other way of describing it to you. So since 2006 to 2012, for the period that we had access to the financial statements of Lonmin, we saw 245 million on average every year shifted out of South Africa to this company in Bermuda. And then it was transferred, of course, to the headquarters of Lonmin. But that was not all. There was also the addition of another payment of a similar amount, which was made to Lonmin Management Services based in another tax haven, Mauritius, where, again, no management services were being provided. So instead of having 500 million every year available for the purposes of paying taxes, for meeting their obligations under the social labor plan, particularly the building of houses. And we know instead of the 550 houses that Lonmin was supposed to build, they only built 3 houses, pleading poverty. Instead of providing a decent wage for workers and negotiating and coming to the negotiating table, what Lonmin did was to collaborate with its BE partner, Shanduka, owned by then or now President Ramaphosa, and the state and the police, and intervened to massacre workers demanding a decent wage. And what we see from the example of Lonmin is that not only do we have a situation of tax avoidance, but we have a situation which is much more pertinent for workers of wage avoidance undertaken by this multinational corporation. But the thing is this, comrades, it is not as if Lonmin is an isolated incident, because this is written into the DNA of these transnational corporations. So you can believe that Sibanye-Stillwater, now the owners of Lonmin, owners of the same subsidiaries that existed then, are probably involved in the same practices. But we don't have access, and we can't say whether Sibanye-Stillwater is undertaking these practices, because we don't have access to the financial statement of Sibanye-Stillwater's subsidiaries. And so it is that we had to rely on accidents, if you like, where we managed to get some of this information to see that this is a practice that is universalized amongst these transnational corporations. A few years ago, AMCU faced the retrenchment of 1,000 workers at a company called Barplatz. Barplatz is a company owned in Canada with a subsidiary in Barbados. The Barbados company loaned Barplatz a huge amount of money, over R1 billion, and Barplatz in South Africa never declared a profit because it was constantly paying the interest on this loan. This is another form through which the profits of a corporation are shifted out of the reach of the taxpayer, but also out of the control of workers demanding a decent wage and decent work. And so we could show that it was unnecessary for Barplatz to retrench these workers. They had a sufficient amount of resources to be able to pay these workers a decent and living wage if they stopped this practice of profit shifting out of the country. So not only do we have the example of Lonmin, we also have the example of Barplatz to indicate how this process is taking place and how it continues to take place. And then we have a situation today where AMCU has taken the second biggest chrome mining corporation in the world to court for the same practice of profit shifting, illegally millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars out of South Africa. AMCU has taken Samancor to court for a whole range of illegal and fraudulent activities, but including the payment of a 9% sales marketing arrangement. Again, it's a non-existent company in a tax haven called Malta, robbing the workers of a huge amount of money. robbing the empowerment shareholders share equity scheme that exists at Samancor. Now, comrades, it is extremely important, as I close, for us to understand how significant, if you go back to the point I made about the scale of these illicit financial flows, you can see that in this country, the necessity of stopping the practice so that there is money to build the houses for our people, to build and fix the collapsing infrastructure, to employ workers. All this money, this 25 billion US dollars that is being lost to this country needs to stop. It's an issue for working class people, for the trade union movement to take up. But for that to happen, we need to demand transparency. We need to demand that the financial statements of the subsidiary companies are made available to Comrade Jimmy Gama when he does wage negotiations, as he's now doing in the platinum sector. We need to know what are the subsidiaries' financial situation, because if we don't know that, we will be told a lie that the company cannot afford. And when we go on strike, as we have done at Sibanye Gold and Sibanye Platinum in previous periods, we face the danger that our struggle will be delegitimized because we will be told we are unrealistic in our wage demands. But on the contrary, the super concentration of wealth in a few people's hands gives a lie to that. In a country where 90% of the wealth is owned by just 10% of the people, then we have to say, Pambili amku pambili. We've got to go forward with our struggle because we need to liberate these resources for the working class so that we can have a life. And we can have a life when we avoid a situation of a country like South Africa saying we don't have money because, and therefore we have to cut our budgets for education, health, and so on. So you can see that this illicit financial flows is a key instrument to reversing a very reactionary set of economic policies that are systematically disempowering and impoverishing working people in this country. And therefore, today, we salute AMCU for being the leading union in fighting against illicit financial flows and bringing this to the fore. And we urge the labor movement in this country to take this issue seriously, because if we don't, we will not get the life, the better life that our comrades at Lonmin, at Marikana, fought and died for. Amandla.